Hello, fortune seekers. Could you scratch my back? What if I were to scratch your back? You know what we call that in the business, buddy? An incentive. We are incentivized to participate in activities and commerce every day, sometimes nearly invisibly. As X Seekers of Fortune grows, we are looking towards incentive to attract more players. What can we learn from incentive programs of the past to guide us in making the incentive program of the future? All this and so much more on today's episode of the Moth Studios Super Secret Podcast. Shh, don't tell anybody about it. Hello again. I'm your host, expert Filipino cultural mansplainer, Joel Watts, joined as always by
the mortified Daniel Ayu, willing to refute all your claims as per usual.
I think the proof is in the pudding from the last
Flawn.
guy did a knockout job.
Proof is in the flawn.
Flawn. Yes, the flawn. And speaking of last episode, on last week's episode, we had our first. And if you want to hear our learn more about how to find your way through, take a step back on your feed. Today on episode 13 of the Moth Studios Super Secret Podcast, we're going to be talking about incentives and all the benefits that they can have on your organization or your business, and some
game.
Or game.
Game. Don't forget the games. We're a gaming podcast, Joel.
We are a gaming. I think we have put that as both an organization and a business is a game.
Fair.
But they haven't. But Danny, as you might know, and we're about to get into the stories.
He's hot on the mansplaining.
Incentives can have both good consequences. We'll get into some of those, but they also have some strange, unforeseen consequences that you need to be aware of while you're implementing them. And we've done some research in order to tell you a few of these stories and how we're going to learn from the past, both the past successes and the past mistakes, and try to implement great incentives for X Seekers of Fortune. But before we get into all of that, Danny, do you want to answer a question for me?
Pass.
Well, too bad, because it's the format of the show, and I am the host. So what I say goes until I hand off the baton.
When did we agree that you were the host?
It was an arbitrary decision that we made very early on that has gone straight to my head.
Okay.
So this week's question, it comes from our Discord server, which I'm super excited about. It is so fun when our community interacts with us, and you could become part of our community and interact with us by joining our Discord server. That's X Seekers of Fortune on Discord. And there you can ask us pretty much anything, and we'll answer it here on the show. So this week's question comes from, and let me make sure I'm getting this right, Rickman33.
Yeah, I think that's what you have in the notes.
Okay. Well, Rickman33, who asked, can we name a film you feel you can repeatedly watch more than any other, and why is it so rewatchable?
Okay. Wow.
Danny, do you have
an answer? I do have an answer for this. I think it's not the answer that most people who know I'm have a filmmaking background would expect. It's not Citizen Kane. Look, I'll give you what they were when I was a kid, because I watched a lot of movies over and over again when I was a kid, and then I'll give you what it is now.
Okay.
All right. When I was a kid, it was a few movies. Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
I watched that so many times.
Mm-hmm.
I watched Austin Powers, The Spy Who Shagged Me, quite a bit. and I watched the Indiana Jones movies quite a few times, over and over.
Mm-hmm.
Last Crusade specifically.
Are we the same person?
Oh, maybe. Probably not.
Okay.
You know a lot more about Filipino culture than I do.
Yeah, you're damn right.
And Mongols.
I'm a very world literate person, but not geographically, I'm not very geographically gifted, but I know a lot about the world history and cultures.
We'll have to get you some more geographical gifts. Today, though, right now, I would say, and this is an answer that I think I'm going to get a lot of groans for, but my like comfort movie that I'll go back and watch like maybe a couple times per year is actually two movies. It's Infinity War and Endgame.
Ooh, I don't know, man. That doesn't seem like that groanable of an answer. I mean, I personally feel like I was a big Marvel fan, or at least I was a fan of the Marvel MCU up through Endgame because they landed the ship. And
They
those
did.
two movies go so well together because it's like possibly even better than Star Wars in terms of like, Empire to Return of the Jedi. This Infinity War into Endgame might actually be a more solid full story.
I would say Infinity War has, one of my favorite endings of any movie ever. My only complaint is that Endgame exists. But other than that, and I like Endgame, don't get me wrong, but I mean, they did Thanos dirty.
Oh, oh, I see. I see which side of the fence you're on. And, brother, welcome aboard on the Thanos did nothing wrong side of the fence.
100%. That doesn't surprise me at all from a Genghis Khan apologist. So.
Oh, yeah. A strong fist leads this world. No, I was going to say I am a huge fan. To be a little more sincere about it, I think that those two movies made me realize how good Nebula was as a character, or is as a character.
Karen Gillian, so good.
She is so good, and I think she secretly has the best story arc of. I mean, I don't know if it's a secret, and she has my personal favorite story arc. I like, and that's something you can do in comics. I always go back to this and like things that we should be thinking about in developing the story of Rex Seekers of Fortune. We should look at that as an example. She literally kills her former self in order to self-actualize.
So cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, I personally think that's a great answer, Danny.
Thank you, Joel.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Plus, you had like all the classics that we both grew up on. I was a huge Star Wars fan as well. Wore out those VHS tapes. Once I've discovered Indiana Jones, I couldn't stop watching it. So I was a huge fan of those movies, but I do have to admit that I feel like just like you, movies. What I usually do is I find a movie I really love and I wring it dry. Like I used to do the same thing with records, where I would listen to it so much, so frequently in a short span of time that eventually it just wore off. Like that magic that's in music eventually dissipates if you just overuse it. There's probably a drug analogy in there if you're looking for one, which you should be. But I will say that a movie that if anybody was to suggest that we put it on and enjoy and indulge in, that I could keep going back to as an adult, and I think it's because I'm an adult and this is now my own nostalgia, 10, 12 years on, is Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I really enjoy the story of Scott Pilgrim versus the universe, the comic book series, but it's a little rougher to sit down and read it through an entire comic book series. And the movie does a good enough job encapsulating what was so special about it. And, what was so unique about being in an early 20-something scumbag kind of guy in, like the late 2000 teens, aughts, I think it's called, the late aughts through the teens, that it is kind of like, I'm not saying I'm Scott Pilgrim and I totally identify with everything he does. He has his own issues. I had my own issues, but it's definitely like being a young man who isn't fully put together yet. I can really identify with that. It reminds me of a better time. It reminds me of going to see shows at clubs that you couldn't even afford when you couldn't even afford a beer at the club.
Nice, bro.
Yeah.
Nice. Edgar Wright makes some very, very rewatchable films. Generally.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's good that he weaves so much into them. But that's in general our answer. So Rickman 33, I hope that you enjoyed our little diatribe into film, and we're going to be getting into more of those questions and more films as the series goes on, as our podcast goes on. But like I said, if you want to join Rickman 33 and asking us questions that we can answer on the podcast, please just join the Discord. You'll find an AMA there. Post your question, and we'll answer it on the show.
Yeah, and add your question, any answers. If you got movies that you love to rewatch, drop them in our comments on the YouTube video, or jump on the Discord and let us know. We'd be interested to hear what your hot takes are.
Yeah. Tell us why Scott Pilgrim's actually like the worst movie ever made,
and why it reminds you 100% of Joel's real life persona.
If you knew me at the time in my early you knew me, but I'm saying if other people did, like, some of our former coworkers, if they want to jump on this episode, I'd love to hear stories in the comments. All right.
In the comments.
So let's move on to the main topic of the episode, Danny, because I think there's like quite a few stories to tell here, and we've actually done something called a little bit of research for this episode. So we might have a few things to go off on.
Okay.
But so X Seekers of Fortune and incentives and how maybe not to use them. Okay. So I think you've told me quite a few good stories about this, and I'll definitely hand over the reins over to you here in a moment. But, basically the way I see it is incentives are a very powerful tool, but like most tools, a hammer can drive in a nail, but it can also knock a hole through your wall. Your mileage may vary with incentives, and, incentivizing somebody to do something, if all they're doing it for is the incentive itself, could cause negative ramifications if they learn to game the system. So we have some examples of positive outcomes from incentives, like probably the things that you've seen in most like college textbooks. But we also have some examples of negative incentives, or the even darker side of incentives, quotas that have to be met. And then we want to wrap things up by talking about the how we want to implement incentives, or how we're using this information to think about how to implement incentives into X Seekers of Fortune. So why don't we start off with some positive incentives? And with that, I'll just lay out a few companies that have really benefited from utilizing incentive programs. You might have heard of them. IBM. Ooh. Starbucks. Have you had your coffee today?
What?
Google. I mean, you're probably on it right now. And the one that's closest to my heart is Toyota. I can't wait to own one of their cars. So all of these companies have used incentives to reward their employees and customers to strive further, to buy their products, or to make their products better. Now, Danny, you've been in the working world and you've heard a lot of anecdotes. Is there any particular incentives gone right that you can think of that you'd like to share with us?
I can give you a personal anecdote from a time that I utilized a incentive in order to get benefit for the unit that I was supervising at the time. So I used to work, as you did at one point in time, for a hotel. And my job at the hotel required me to supervise the operators that answer the phones at the hotel.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we were really focused on at the hotel, as you would hope, was customer satisfaction, making sure people had an awesome experience. So anytime anyone would call in with any sort of issue, we had an opportunity for our operators to log that call and in something that we called We Care. And what it meant was it would raise the profile of the case so that everyone in the hotel would be aware of it, and we could try to action it and be proactive in delighting our guests. Sounds great, right?
Yeah.
And so we really tried to get people to add one We Care entry per shift. Just all we wanted was just one. And if we could get everyone to do one per shift, we would blow our number out of the water. We would get, some sort of prize for our department, and everyone would be happy with us. We couldn't get anyone to do it ever. No one would ever enter it. Maybe we get like one or two a month.
Okay.
Right? So my manager at the time came to me and was like, can you figure out how to get them to do this? So incentives, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways you can use incentives. You could say, hey guys, if you enter more We Care entries than anyone else, everyone's going to get a pizza party. That's what the hotel had done. It did not work. Obviously, no one really cares about pizza, right?
No.
Should have done a T-shirt, right? No. Absolutely no. I maybe did something that I would describe as being more of the stick than the carrot.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I said, hey guys, you don't have to put the We Care entries at all. I don't care if you do one at all. If you don't, though, I just need you to send me an email letting me know that there were no entries. And you need to just give me this information. So all I did was make it equal work, maybe slightly more work to do the negative thing that they weren't doing than the positive thing. And then our numbers went through the roof because they wanted to write me the email.
Yeah, it's like who wants that hanging over their head on the last day of the week, and it's like, oh, now I have to write an email about how I didn't do my job.
Yeah,
so,
one sentence in the We Care log or 3 sentences to Danny. What do I want to do?
that is a really clever incentive. Now that I'm scratching the back of my head, I'm really having a hard time coming up with a great example. I haven't worked at the best incentivizing companies before. They usually they usually went all stick, no carrot.
Yeah, that's how it goes.
Yeah, I don't know. If I come up with one, I'll insert it here, or I'll insert it at any point here. But just to go back to some of those companies that I mentioned earlier, so with IBM, I guess this was like I didn't get to go deep on this one, but basically it seems like they had one of the first sales incentives in the like in the country, I guess, with the 100% club. And like they just incentivized people selling, and got, with trips, extravagant trips that you could win, and they just saw numbers going through the roof. I think they sort of maybe broke ground on the incentive train maybe back in like the 70s or 80s. But I think the one that most of us know about and probably have been tempted to do is Starbucks tuition assistance program, which makes it to where their employees are much more I don't want to say indebted. That's like not the right word, but endeared to the company by, like, I work at Starbucks. Yeah, well, they don't have, but here's the thing: they don't have debts,
Okay.
because it's like I could go and get a job at Starbucks, and within a few months, I think, could start going back to school to learn more skills. Which, let's face it, we could all use more skills, if in this day and age. So I think that that's a very endearing one. And there's a couple others. There's a couple others here, but the one that I really love, like I said, Toyota's close to my heart. And they actually have an incentive. It's almost a philosophy. It's the Kaizen philosophy of productivity. And basically what this is that any employee who sees any improvement they can make on the line in order to make their products more efficiently or better, they can like call a halt to the line and, bring this to their management, bring this to their superiors at the company, and they can talk through it and see if they can implement it. And they are very well rewarded if they find these things. And, I mean, I don't know what your opinion on Toyota is, but my opinion is my next car is going to be a Toyota, because I just feel like of all the brands that are out there, they're the most best reputation. You see, like, my girlfriend right now is driving a Toyota Corolla from probably my graduation year with over 250,000 miles on it, and it's still holding together and, doing her well.
They called it the Toyota Miracle for a reason, and continuous improvement is super important for any organization, and incentivizing everyone in your organization to think in a continuous improvement mindset is huge. I think one of the keys here, with respect to creating incentives, positive incentives, and what you see here with IBM and Toyota and Starbucks is a trend of looking at what you want from the people you're working with, looking at what you want and figuring out how you can give them reasons to want what you want, so that getting what you want is the same thing that they want, and everyone wins.
Yeah. Makes so much sense. It also reminds me of an old truism that I heard from a manager, and it changed. And like every now and then you hear one of those truisms, and maybe I'm a simple guy who these things really work on, but I feel like every now and then you hear one that clicks with you and changes your life a little bit. But they said, what is measured is managed. And incentives, more so than anything, give like a little ding when something goes right. And so you can start measuring it. And if you're measuring something, that's when you can actually apply data and start strategizing around it. And we've had that happen many times, where all of a sudden we go through the looking glass of something not really mattering to us, or not really being on a radar, to us actually starting to pay attention to it, to us actually starting to master it, or at the very least have like opinions and ideas and tactics for it that we're trying to implement. And I feel like incentives, not only are they a good way to give rewards out, to show appreciation, to really highlight great performance, but it also means like this moment is celebrated and notated. And that means, it can be, like I said, it can be mastered. You're starting to measure it, so you're going to manage it.
As we're going to see as we go deeper in here, and then eventually towards the end of the conversation, bring it back to game design and discussing game design. Incentives really inform human behavior. And oftentimes when you look at what a person is doing and why they're behaving in the way that they're behaving, you need to look at their incentives to figure out why they're doing what they're doing. Because generally speaking, people will do things that make some kind of sense. It may not make obvious sense, but there's something going on that is benefiting them with how they're acting. And it can be obscure, right? It could actually be something completely internal and psychological. They get a benefit of feeling like they are wronged or victimized. There's something going on inside them that is actually rewarding them for having that feeling and mentality. So it's not always clear what your incentives are, but if you see human behavior and you want to understand it and you want to figure out a way maybe to redirect it, it's very important to understand the incentives that influence it.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's a lot more. I mean, and trust me, like, how should I say, to talk towards it, but also, kind of avoid the topic a little bit since we're not that kind of podcast. I will say, often when you're hearing people talk about political situations, they often will, when in their criticisms, will talk about how people were incentivized to do what they consider the non-good thing, the non-moral thing, and that's why so and such administration or this policy was wrong, or things like that. Or and also when you look at good things, often they will point to like, well, the incentives were there for everybody to do like to come together. So it is like, I'm not going to say you can boil everything down to incentives, but you could definitely, you might actually be able to change the course of human history with the proper incentives.
I agree with that 100%. I think Upton Sinclair put it very well when he said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it.
Yeah, which definitely has some dark implications. There was another quote that this almost reminds me of as we move into the negative side, that negative outcome of incentives. This one has stuck with me for a long time too. I forgot who said it. Do you want me to Google it really fast so we're full?
You can, or we can just like go full ignorant and just kind of just guess.
No,
Why don't
I
you
think
quote
this
it?
this guy's name should live in infamy because he's right, but it's also dark.
Ooh, okay.
I can.
I'm gonna do a little commentary as Joel does the googling. For those at home, Joel has a really intense look on his face. He's got his fingers locked in. It's like a scene out of a movie where the hacker is trying to desperately break into the mainframe to destroy the Pentagon. And I mean, you can see the sweat glistening on his forehead. You can see the intense stare on his face as he hones in on his prize, which is a quote with a proper attribution in this particular case.
Oh, it's actually one of those things where the quote is has a deeper well to like actually has an entire article about trying to figure out who said the quote. So I'm going to say that this is maybe one of those like it was said by somebody and it just took off.
You might have said it.
I could have said it. Yeah.
Let's say Joel said it.
Yeah.
We
Well,
solved
why
the mystery
not?
right here. Okay. What is it, Joel?
Okay.
What did you say?
Well, it is, the famous quote is, I can hire half the poor to kill the other half. And it's like, to me, there's a kind of a negative incentive there. The idea of like, why would this person be incentivized to change the world for the better when he knows that the people who, between the have-nots, there's the ones who will strive to get just a paycheck, and the ones who will, are weaker and will be pushed down by those. So, in a way, I mean, this might be a little bit off the beaten path. Maybe we could do an entire episode on that quote alone, but
Yeah.
I do feel like that kind of shows like how incentives can become, can be used tyrannically. And so we do have a few examples of that here.
What
Let me get back
motivated
to my
you?
notes.
What motivated you to say that in the first place?
That's the truth. I'm rolling in it, and all these poor folks. You don't even need half to control the other half. You only need 5% of highly motivated people to really rain terror upon the rest of the populace.
This is another one of your lessons from Genghis Khan.
Yes, exactly. I mean, Genghis Khan was not efficient enough, in my opinion. You really could have learned. If you give Genghis Khan an Excel spreadsheet, boy, would this world have been a different place. So the negative outcomes for incentives, though, have been numerous, and we do want to avoid those. I know you have a few bangers of stories, so let me go ahead and just rattle off a few of these low-hanging fruit examples. But to give you an idea, there was the famous Wells Fargo aggressive sales quotas, which caused their employees to secretly open up savings accounts for their customers, credit cards for their customers, affecting the customer's finances and credit score. This was, so bad that you have probably received, if you banked with Wells Fargo, you've probably received some sort of financial compensation for it. Another example is standardized testing in general. There's an example out of Denver where teachers were paid for their performance. And all it did was incentivize teachers to identify the students who would do better than average at the standardized test and focus in on teaching them to do, to be as good as they can be, teaching to the test, and then neglecting the students who they wrote off as lost causes, because it would be better for them to make a student go from an 80% to 100% and raise the overall curve than it would be to, spend way too much time getting everybody at the 80% mark. So how things are measured can also have a big effect. Like the measurement is probably the most important part of incentives. Finally, and probably the most tragic of these three that I'm mentioning right now, is the incentivized opioid prescriptions that happened pretty much across our lifetime so far. Like we grew up I would say we were in high school as the opiate crisis started to escalate, and it's just been a constant. I think it's kind of trailing off now, but or gone back underground. It's at the very least not at the same horrible state it was, where doctors were incentivized to prescribe opioids to their customers, or not customers. These aren't customers. These are patients, man. And that's a drug that once you get on and get a taste for it and learn to be comfortably numb, you're going to be chasing it. I mean, we're talking a drug that could, that you can get from your doctor that's comparable to heroin. So, the fact that a company incentivized doctors to prescribe that as just a generic form of pain relief is practically like the sin of our age amongst many. But I know you have some great examples, especially in the terms of quotas.
Yeah. So these are stories that I've picked up along the way. I mean, our listeners may have heard them somewhere else. I don't know, but I thought it would be perfect for illustrating what we're talking about here today. Mm-hmm. So I may get the details and the facts wrong, but the general gist holds, and I think it will be illustrative. So first one, Soviet Russia. Stalin's in charge, and he learns that his fishing numbers are down, and says, "Hey, we need to catch more fish. We need to show more productivity, so that we can feed our people, and show statistics that tell the people that we are catching sufficient numbers of fish." So no one wanted to actually tell Stalin the truth about the challenges that they were facing actually catching that number of fish. So they had to find another way to achieve their goals without upsetting Stalin. Mm-hmm. And as the story goes,
nobody wants to upset Stalin.
No one wants to upset Stalin. As the story goes, the way they did this was they classified whales as fish, and then they caught whales, because the way that the number of fish or the amount of fish that was being caught was measured was by weight. So by catching whales, they could make it appear as though they were catching many, many more tons of fish than they actually were. And because the incentive was, catch this many tons of fish, someone came up with the idea, well, what we'll do is we'll reclassify this as fish. And they completely went and did the complete opposite of what the whole program was intended to do, which was feed people, catch fish, feed people. Instead, it was get that number as high as it can. And the easiest way to do that is to get big, heavy whales in lieu of fish.
Yeah. Also, I think I did do some reading on the story, and not only whales, but endangered whales for the area. Like they definitely had this had a very negative consequence on the ecology or the environment as well.
Now, the second story from history, which is a little bit, I think a little bit cleaner, perhaps. There was a period of time in the late 1800s, the late 18th century, mid 19th century, where Britain was transporting its convicts to its colonies in Australia. And the voyage would take several months, and it was notorious for its high mortality rates. A lot of the prisoners would die en route due to the poor conditions, disease, and mistreatment by the ships. And it became a big outrage in the UK, in Britain. And people were really upset because, some of these convicts were family members. At the very least, it was, people dying. I think it was in the age where you could be a convict just for having debts. I think debtors' prisons were probably a thing. I don't know. But I think that's probably part of the reason why there was so much outrage. Anyway, so many of these convicts were showing up in Australia dead. There was outrage at home. And It took a long time. Everyone was trying to fix the problem. Nothing that they could do would fix the problem. And then one day, someone within the British government recognized that there was an incentive problem. And the incentive problem was the captains were being purely paid for transporting. The convicts would get on the ship, the captain would be paid by the head, and that was the end of it. And then whoever showed up, showed up. So what they did was they changed the payment scheme to pay them for the convicts arriving in Australia. So now all of a sudden, captains aren't getting paid unless they have convicts walking off the ship into the Australian colonies. And you can imagine how quickly those mortality rates dropped just by changing the incentives. So it's super important when we're looking at constructing systems, which in the case of games, we're talking about systems, that we are incentivizing people to do the things we really want them to do. And we're paying attention to the times where we might be incentivizing them to do something that we don't want them to do. And I'm sure we'll talk about that more when we get into the game-specific portion of the conversation.
Oh yeah, that's going to be coming up really soon. I mean, I just wanted to, not to soapbox it too much, but to give you an idea of like an incentive, or an incentive that really backfired, and we're going to be like looking at the consequences of, probably over the course of the rest of our lifetime, is China's one-child policy. And now this one was pretty simple on paper. They were trying to keep population growth down by saying every couple could only have one child amongst them. But this also caused a lot of ramifications in the immediate moment, but also now that that generation is coming of age. I want to say it's pretty much our same generation, maybe a few years set back. And that generation has a gender imbalance because unfortunately it, they didn't take into account. It's like if, one gender boys are for a family worth more for them in the long run than a girl. A girl in Chinese culture was seen as like something that would cause you, to incur debt versus to gain you income. And so that means unfortunately, if a girl was born, there was incentive now for you to lose that girl so you can try again to get a boy. And whatever dark method comes across your mind. Not only that, but it also is now causing a imbalance of the generation, where this generation coming up is actually smaller than the generation that's like getting closer and closer to retirement age. That's something that's happening in a lot of places in the world right now, and we're probably going to see quite a flip in what is it? Not just demographic, but like the entire economy is going to shift because of it. And you hear about it happening in America a little bit, and it's going to be a little bad for us. But in China, I know Japan as well, it's going to be way worse because of for China, because of these basically bad incentives that got put in years ago. And you don't know, and that's the thing, you don't know the negative consequences of policy decisions you make now. You could make a bold thing that you think is going to work wonders, and then the negative side of it won't reveal itself until it's too late and you can't turn back on it, and you're just going to have to deal with the ramifications. And the world, if you're a board game designer who specializes in economic warfare, I'm sure that this will be a time for you to learn a lot of lessons about it coming up in the next few years. But I do think we've kind of laid out the groundwork. Incentives can be very good, and they could potentially grow your business rapidly, make the experience that you want your business to deliver. In your case, the delivery of the experience, it can incentivize the employees to actually follow through with it. Great examples, but they can also have negative consequences that we've talked about here. Especially when the incentives are about quotas and numbers on a spreadsheet, that doesn't always translate to a healthy society, or business. So how are we, Danny, how do you imagine we're going to use these lessons that we've learned through our lifetime to incentivize our players to play our game, and to, maybe even evangelize our game to other gamers?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different ways that incentives might be relevant to people pursuing game design. First, designing the game, making players do the things that they want them to do, and making sure that they don't do the things you don't want them to do. And then second, as you're building your community, finding ways to encourage people to play your game and to share your game with other people. Those are going to be like the two main ways that most people are going to be interested in how to leverage incentives to benefit their game design goals. What we've talked a lot about some of the ways that the game has been broken, and oftentimes it's because the incentives are kind of off, right? We had for a very long time incentivized losing as an optimal strategy by giving players access to more resources when they were behind. So if the best way to win the game was to collect the most resources and convert them into even more powerful resources that you could then use later in the game to beat your opponent, it became incentivized within X Seekers of Fortune for a time to fall behind, to be losing, and let your opponent get ahead so that you could gather as many resources as you could and clobber them. And when we realized that, we realized we were incentivizing people not to try to advance their game plan. And if two players recognize that the optimal strategy is not to attempt to win before the other person, then neither person is completing adventures, which means neither person is progressing the game, which means at a certain point, they're just in a stalemate of not playing the game. And there's 0% chance that a competitive game community is going to spring up around an environment where players are disincentivized from advancing in gameplay.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I was there for like some of these early revelations about how the game could be. I feel like I'm like the one who always like people figure out how to break the game against. Maybe it's because I'm just so earnestly going for like the honest victory. But yeah, I've probably been on the stick end of that situation. But it's like, yeah, if you you have to be careful in making a game. You can incentivize people to play your game to not have fun. People will prioritize winning over fun. And yes, they will do that, and they will pat themselves on the back and finish your game and then probably put it away and never play it again. As I've said before, Magic is a robust game. We love it, but there's a lot of the aspects to Magic, and you could easily spend a lot of money to make yourself play Magic miserably, because there are decks out there, especially in fun formats like Commander, that you could go and spend thousands of dollars to make a deck that will nearly, I don't want to say guaranteed win, it'll win against most of the field until you run up against one of these other guaranteed to win decks. I think that's like, S tier decks, if you will. But if you're winning all the time, you're not going to be having fun. Especially if you're winning in a way that isn't clever or isn't to your play style. Danny, I know, I often lament about how you're a blue player and you have a deck. I'm not sure how you feel about this deck, but you had a deck that I called it inevitability. If we didn't gang up on you, you were going to win sometime around turn 5 or 6. You didn't do all that much before those turns, but once you start going off, there was practically no stopping you. But at the very least, that was an expression of you, like as a player. That was like your version of Magic, and I can respect that. But there's a lot of decks out there that you could just go online, net deck, like the best. There's probably like 3 best Commander decks. You could try to make one of those for probably $4,000 or $5,000 to make it super optimal, and then just have the worst time playing Commander.
Yeah, I mean, and we've encountered people like this, but I mean, it's true. I mean, Magic talks about having those psychographics, right? There's the Timmies who just want to do big, fun, dumb things. There's the Johnnies who want to show you how clever they are with their combos, and there's the Spikes that are just going to do whatever it takes to win, and that may include playing the game in a way that is decidedly unfun for both themselves and the people they're playing with, because that's what's optimal. That's what's going to win. So when you're designing your game, it's super critical that you're honest with yourself about what is the optimal strategy, and are the people who sit down to play the game who are going to find a strategy that is an unfun play pattern for themselves, for other people, and then effectively, to your point, Joel, stop playing from that point forward and find ways to mitigate those strategies and point winning strategies towards fun. And to whatever extent possible, if you can make losing fun, then you have a really, really good game. Because if losing's fun, then it doesn't matter if I win or lose. If I'm having a good time, I'm more likely to run it back. Now, look, I say these things, and this pertains to a specific type of game, right? There are some games that aren't meant to be played optimally. There isn't one way to play. We're not talking about all games, right? But for those out there trying to make competitive games with, competitive strategies, make sure that the strategies that your players are incentivized to pursue are not unfun by nature.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Now, there's two things that came across my mind while you said all that. And one of the things was, I think we could make a really fun where it's like, yeah, I like, we'll maybe cut that out, maybe bleep all that, because I think it's a great that Danny and I could probably perform. The main I'd love to do is for that, whatever. But yeah, would be really fun. Anyways, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, what is measured is managed. And sometimes in order to measure things, you have to create like a box to put people in. This is why marketing puts people in boxes. And what Magic the Gathering did was they created the 3 psychographs, or they discovered and defined the 3 psychographs of gamers that they wanted to appeal to in their game. The Tommy, Timmy, Johnny, and Spike. So Timmy, Johnny, and Spike are like, they can create specific incentives for those three players. Their incentives are designing cards that appeal to those 3 kinds of players, making sure there's enough balance between those cards that all 3 of them can have a good time. Now, the Spike is probably still going to win most of the time.
Yeah, and just because I know somebody out there is raging at us right now for not mentioning the other 2 psychographics, there is Vorthros and Melvin as well.
Vorthros is the lore centric one. We're actually getting to our own Vorthros with where we're at in development of the game, because we're having to like create the art. We're working with artists to create the art, and we're actually having to like come up with all the little stories that go on the art of the card. So I know Vorthros, but what is Melvin? What is Melvin?
My understanding is Melvin are the players that are really just like the mechanics geeks. They're really interested in the way that the game technically works.
Okay.
And so they geek out over new mechanics, but they aren't necessarily motivated by the other things. Now, I could be wrong about that. Roast me in the comments if I am.
I mean, everybody who kind of like wants to, carve out their own very specific niche. But I do think Melvin does sound like a type of player who isn't the other ones, or it's like a subcategory that would attach to any of the other types of players, because, that's the judge. That's the person who wants to become a local judge, right? Basically, or somebody who wants to like try to use Magic the Gathering to create another game, which we definitely need to try a few of those here on the podcast and review them. I really would love to try, what is it called? Forgetful Fish. So
is that what it's called?
I believe so. I forget.
I think I know what you're talking about, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah. Anyways, we're going down the Magic the Gathering rabbit hole, which I really enjoy, and I can't wait to talk more about Magic, which is going to be coming up very soon.
Yeah, we've got some big guests lined up for that.
Yeah, exactly. But let's get back to incentives. So that's how Magic has used incentive in their game. So we have the 3 decks, but everybody was enamored because the most unique cards and the most interesting cards come out of the Action X deck. And there was only one way of drawing Action X cards for the longest time in our game, which was completing adventures.
Yep.
And once we got that feedback, and I had you know how it goes. Like usually when we finally make a decision, one of us has been banging the drum about it for like a few weeks, if not a few months in advance. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like one of us was saying that there has to be some other way of getting into the Action X deck. We got to figure that out. And I remember we had a play test with your brother Lucas and his girlfriend Sam. And that was the key takeaway. We finally heard loud and clear, the thing that would make me more interested in this game is if I got more Action X cards. And that, finally let us figure out, decide we need to make a mechanic to do that. And we implemented it. And there's been, I think, a few more, situations like that. But yeah, ultimately it's either giving the players what they want or making sure that they can't do what we don't want. Is there any other gameplay specific or game design specific things before we move on to the more meta, marketing idea of it all?
No, not specifically. I mean, I think that if we went through, we could dig through it. But I think we pretty well illustrated it with, both the example of incentivizing players to fall behind as an example of a incentive that we mismanaged, or were not properly, monitoring and managing, and then also with introducing breakthrough as an alternative way to incentivize people to play the game more by giving them more of what they wanted.
Yeah, I think those are like definitely two of the clearest examples in the game itself. Now, sorry. Now we are also starting to talk about. We're moving into the marketing of the game. We're moving into this game is quickly becoming more and more of a reality. As I said, we are actually looking at artwork coming in nearly on a daily basis,
Yeah.
like little improvements in art. So like more and more it's becoming, we need people to know this game and play this game. So I don't think we're going to make steadfast announcements here, but we have some brainstormed ideas on how to add incentives to the play experience. Do you kind of want to lay out like a little bit of the roadmap for what we're thinking and why we think this is going to, bring more players in to play more frequently?
Yeah, I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel here. This isn't going to be exciting news to anyone, something they haven't heard before. But prize support is an enormous motivator for a lot of players when they're playing games, and so we are working on our initial prize support, and we're going to be offering it online to players who participate in our beta. And help us with playtesting, and we'll have more details rolled out probably by the time that this podcast airs. Joel probably will come on with some sort of addendum, kind of giving you more of the details. But at the time of this recording, it's still very much in the cooking phase. We're just tweaking the numbers and making sure everything is attractive enough to players and sustainable enough for a business that is just starting out in the world.
I'll tell you this, there's a truism in, to spend money to make money. And you definitely need to offer people some, early adopters, some freebies in order to get them to evangelize your game. I mean, I would say like the model that we're essentially going for is what you'd probably see in, a app-like game where it's like checking in, playing more, gets you more rewards. So we don't know all the numbers, but basically we're going to start tracking players, and we have to, there's a lot to figure out here. It's going to be good for our business because we're going to have to find a way of tracking our players up, how many times they play the game. If you reach certain milestones, say you play 25 or 30 games, you get a prize. So and it's going to be good for us because we need to start building those infrastructures on our side of things in order to track our players and, to know if our incentives are working or not.
Yep. You bring up a really great point there, which is, when we decided to launch this prize support program, the first inclination is to do what everyone always does, right? Which is, if you win, you get a prize, right? And that makes sense in certain contexts, but this is why it's important to take a step back and say, what am I truly trying to incentivize? And if you're trying to incentivize people playing the game and you reward people for winning the game, you're saying, okay, only the people who play and win are going to find this program to be exciting and beneficial to them. And the people who play and lose are going to back out and not even try it. Or if they haven't even started, the prizes aren't going to be interesting to them because there's, how long is it going to be before they're good enough to win one, right? So we look at that and we say, well, actually what we care about is people playing games. We don't care if they win or lose. So why don't we design a prize support program that only cares about whether you're playing or not? And then then it, to your point, Joel, becomes about validating them actually playing the game. But, that's an example of taking a step back, looking at the situation, figuring out exactly what you want, and adjusting your model, your system, to optimize for a very specific output. In this case, games played over games won.
Exactly. I completely agree that, the more it's almost a Stockholm effect thing, right? The Stockholm syndrome. The more you play a game, the more you tend to like fall in love with it for whatever reason. Especially as we've talked about with our game. When I teach somebody to play the game fresh, one of the things I always love to bring up, and maybe it makes me sound like a smug. Let's face it, you wear the mask that you're given. I always make sure to let people know when they feel like they've made a mistake or something like that. I'm like, you have to remember, this is a game that you play. You're not meant to be playing this game once or twice or 3 times. This is a game that you play 50, 100 times. You're meant to master this game. These mistakes that you make now are only going to reinforce you becoming better at the game. So I think that anybody who plays this game 50 times, as long as they're trying to get better, they're going to pick up strategies along the way that will make them be able to play in a competitive space. On a competitive level. The only thing that I think separates people who could have a chance playing competitively and those who can't are the ones who just know how the game works. And the only way you're going to learn how the game works is playing it more often. So I think, yeah, it's like, we're going to have, I think once we get this up and running and we got some really sharp players out there, we're going to have tournaments where the winner is taking home, the cake. But that's a place we're going to get to, but right now what we really want is just people to be good at the game and to have a loving relationship with the game. And that just requires time and putting in the hours and putting in the rounds and the reps.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, did you have anything else that was on top of your mind about the incentive programs that we might be implementing now or in the future?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I mean, if you'd like me to sum it up with just a few key takeaways,
I would.
It's really trying to understand exactly what you want and figuring out what it would be that would motivate someone to do, or perform whatever behavior would produce what you want. When you see somebody doing something that isn't what you want, try to understand what's motivating them to do that. Those are examples of where positive and negative incentives come from. Ultimately, it's really about understanding exactly what the outcomes are that you want to achieve and understanding what the drivers are for people to behave the way that they do. So take time. Oftentimes what we do is we say, hey, we have to do this for this reason. This is either we've thought about this a bunch and this is what we did, or, this is the way it's done. Whenever you find yourself thinking that way, take a step back, pause, think from first principles, say to yourself, why does it have to be this way? Are all the things that were true when I made this decision previously still true? Are all the things that are normally true in situations where this is the norm true and relevant to the situation at hand for me right now? And you'll avoid making a lot of mistakes if you take more time to think through problems from first principles.
Okay. No, I completely agree. And yeah, and I think you said it best. You got to go back and update your understanding from time to time, because incentives that work this decade might not work next decade. Hell, incentives work this month might not work next month, for whatever reason. So, just remember this is also kind of a trend thing. So, keep that in mind. Check. Just because something's is set up and successful doesn't mean you can ignore it. Turn around and ignore it. Hence why Toyota still allows employees to, just shut down the factory. Put a stop on work in order to express how something could be done better. That you're never too old for that, or you're never too long for that. So. We do have, we have something random coming up, I believe, but for right now, really quick, let's do a teaser for next week. And you know what? So we're going kind of 2 for 2. On next episode, we got our second guest ever, Ben Mertz from Affect Games for Good. And he's going to share their mission for teaching, games for good, as well as making the best print and plays you have ever seen on TikTok and designing a truly meta game. And I'm going to get to play that game with Ben himself. So tune in next week for that.
Okay. Well, I hope you don't have to do anything with pro wrestling.
Oh, wait. I wrote this in. I need to start saying this. And sorry, audience, but you're going to have to get annoyed by this. So subscribe to our channel and ring that dang bell so you can get that pod when it is hot and fresh. Are you ringing that bell, Danny?
I'm ringing the bell. I'm ringing
ding,
all
ding,
the bells.
Ding, 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 ding. Dinner bell. Because that's hot and fresh podcast coming straight to you. when you ring that bell and like our show. So please press the like button right now. I'm sure we've said something that you liked.
Yeah, probably
Anyways,
about
Danny,
Genghis Khan and Excel sheets.
probably. I can't. I think we came up with a new game already. So, Danny, you have something for me?
I do. This has been a trying day. This is a doubleheader.
Yeah.
We've had two episodes recorded today, which is not normal for us. My brain is fried, and I spent a lot of time preparing for the interview that we did earlier, and did not spend a lot of time preparing something random. So I'm going to propose that we do a draft like we have in the past when we did movie theater snacks.
Okay.
And I am going to propose that we do movie villains.
You draft movie villains. Okay, so are we drafting them to be on a team that fights against each other, or is this just like to be our personal Mount Rushmore?
Your personal Mount Rushmore.
Okay, cool.
All right.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and give you first pick since you are the host. The most.
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah.
Fascination with Mongols.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Movie villains. Now, movie villains, they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And you know what? I think it would be... There's one who's on top of the mind, but I don't want to snipe one of your picks because I know that it's going to be very important for you. So I'm going to move over to, I guess, a villain that fascinated a lot of us. Actually, no, I should save him. I need to pick a big guy. That's how drafts work. Just so you know, the way you draft,
first round pick.
Yeah, you got to use your first round to take a first round worthy pick. I got somebody who's like, potentially not going to come up at all. So I have to pick a heavy hitter. And that brings me to one of the best tragic heroes of cinema, one of the most powerful characters of cinema, a man who could stand at the end of a hallway and make an entire audience scream and shout with the flick of a switch on a lightsaber, Mr. Darth Vader himself. Darth Vader has to be one of the top movie villains of all time, one of the most iconic. He has a sound, just a single sound that you can play this in shivers. That's iconography. And I was there day one with all the Star Wars fans when Rogue One came out, and they almost shouldn't even have the scene with Darth Vader in it earlier, because the hallway scene was all that audience needed. We were cheering in delight and squealing with demented, pent up rage of just seeing this horrible mutilation of these poor rebel soldiers at the hand of the most powerful space wizard in the galaxy. And it was so fun.
Wow. Well, Vader is definitely a pick that I think would be very hard to argue with for round one. Pick one. I think, obviously I think you're alluding to the other more recent big bad, which is Thanos. And I will take Thanos with my first round pick because, like I said, they did Thanos wrong. One snap's enough.
Just let him stay on the farm. You already lost, Avengers. They broke space. They broke space time and the quantum zone in order to defeat Thanos, to revert to Thanos' plan. But they were really sad. You have to give them credit. They really made those. They made them sound. They made everybody so sad.
They were so sad.
I think that 5 years later, title card actually surprised me. In the theater, I was like, oh, we're going there. Anyways, okay, I'm trying to think of another great first round draft pick. How many picks are we going to go total?
5 each.
5 each? Okay. So I'm trying to think of at least one more super iconic big bad, just okay, if I'm going super iconic, a character I almost regret. They are so good that they got under the skin of the wrong kind of people and made a generation of man, a certain kind of man, insufferable. But you can only achieve that when the character is that good and that complex that people who think they're complex latch onto them. dirt latches onto soap or something like that. This character is the Crown Prince of Crime, the Clown Prince of Crime in
Can I take a
Gotham
guess
City.
who it is? Oh,
Well, I think who are you going to guess?
Borat.
That is actually, yeah, that should be considered one of the great villains of our time. Sacha Baron Cohen is a bit of a menace in some regards, but he's also he uses his power for both good and evil. No, of course, I think by the time I said Clown Prince of Crime, you knew who I was talking about.
Yeah,
The
Borat.
Joker.
Oh,
What was that?
Borat.
Okay, so the Joker is, obviously Batman's number one villain. I find it so odd that, such an iconic villain is a clown, but so appropriate. And to the point where I'm starting to think, you know what? Clowns have a resurgence coming. I think there's a place in our society for clowns, and we need to start embracing them. We all had the funny meme that we were all afraid of clowns as a kid, but that was just a funny thing to say. I don't think it was actually that true for all that many people. Shout at me in the comments if it was true for you, but I really think we all just thought it was something funny to say that clowns terrified us. And then we had, when the weird viral marketing for It. I am still convinced where clowns were ever present and ever terrifying, like intentionally scary clowns. That was a craze, if you can believe it. What, in 2000, what was that, 17,
Yeah, I
16,
remember
17? Yeah.
It was kind of like, you remember when those monoliths started appearing everywhere?
I do. I kind of remember that.
It was like that with the clowns. They were just like,
Yeah.
hey, there's a clown over there on the edge of the woods just staring menacingly at us.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It took off. It was a weird, subversive trend. But the Joker, there's been many different interpretations, and I gotta put my chips on the Heath Ledger interpretation, the Agent of Chaos version of the Joker, because it's like, for better or worse, he kind of has some points that you might want to mull over throughout that movie. I'm not saying he's right. I'm not saying he's like Thanos level. The Joker did nothing wrong, but I am saying that he for being a comic book movie, that character, the conversations he has with Batman definitely bring up some high level philosophy that is going on in like the psychology of man.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to go with somebody who's less of a villain and more of just a mentor. Hannibal Lecter.
Okay. That's a good one.
Sticking on the trend of choosing people who have a bad rep and did nothing wrong.
I mean, people who eat people are the luckiest people, aren't they?
We're on a roll today with the poor killing the poor and Genghis Khan using Excel.
I guess what we're learning
People
is I'm
eating
about
people
I'm
are the
about to
luckiest people.
I'm about to become the villain of this podcast.
You have been for a long time, my dear.
I'm about to enter. I actually think I'm about to enter my villain era. I'm just going to let folks know I'm going to do something with this mustache I got going on here very soon.
Is that a temporary tattoo or a real mustache?
It's a push broom.
Okay. I don't even want to know what that means.
I thought it's not something that they call a mustache. They call it a broom, a face broom or something, a lip broom. I forget. So I'm on pick 3. And so now we're kind of, I've got 2 big boys on the board. I got my 2 all-stars of villainry. I could probably put in some more support players, so I don't have to be as high up. I think it would be a little wrong. Well, I shouldn't say a little wrong, but I don't think a list without comic. Well, I have a comic book villain. What am I saying? I'm going to move off the comic book villain, actually, now that I think about it long and hard enough. So I'm trying to think of a villain who's really, truly terrified me. Like, like the one who has that monologue that's just so cold that you just can't help but think that they're, more than just right. See, now that, I keep thinking towards Indiana Jones, but the weird thing about the Indiana Jones film series is they not weird, but I think smartly divided their villains between usually a heavy who had a good presence but wasn't really like all that deep, and then like a much softer, more industrious style villain. And so none of them feel like the full package. So I'm kind of moving away from that. Like, you want a villain who just truly terrifies you. I think we're going to have to go with No Country for Old Men. Anton Sugar for the pick, the villain who is practically death incarnate, the villain who will just show up to unannounced, unnoticed, and end you while looking you in the eyes, and have nothing like remorse, nothing like feeling, just cold, calculated machine doing its work. So, yeah, that's pick number 3.
Okay, I'm not gonna move away from comic books. I'm gonna stick with comic books. I'm gonna pick one, which is another MCU performance that I felt like I was very impressed by. I'm gonna go with Killmonger from Black Panther.
That, when I said I was thinking about picking a comic book character, that was who I was about to pick.
Oh dang!
Yeah. No, Killmonger, I'm glad we get to talk about Killmonger then, because he is one of my favorite MCU villains of all time, with the best line in the MCU. Aside, well, I have 2 favorite lines in the MCU, and one of them is Killmonger's.
Tell us.
Which one? Oh, the throw me over. What? I got to say it right, Danny. It's too good of a line, so let me bring it up.
Okay.
So I'll try my best to not overdo this. Bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage.
Depends what kind of bondage.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, let's face it. Back in those days, they didn't have the fun bondage. Anyways, so Killmonger, one of the best lines. For the record, my favorite line is, I think it was, "I can't captain's orders," which is a kind of a throwaway line from a character, in Captain America, Winter Soldier, who refuses to press the button to launch the helicarriers that are going to destroy the world. Basically Captain America delivers a speech, and this one almost nobody character just says that, and I think it's like the selling line. It's the cherry on top of Captain America's speech, where you're just like, well, damn, anybody can be a hero.
Yeah, anyone.
Mm-hmm. All right,
it's your pick, man. It's your fourth pick, so you got to make it count.
Okay, this guy's been on my mind since the first pick. I almost am tempted to save him for last, but I want to challenge myself to have to come up with somebody in the last place slot, somebody really good. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this guy now, and he is, he is the villain of Die Hard, the original. Probably one of the first swag villains that I really got into. I believe he goes by Hans Landa.
Hans Gruber.
Hans Gruber. Oh my God. Wait, let me retake that. I believe he goes by Hans Gruber. Now,
Will's not going to let you get away with that.
I know Hans. I was confusing him for somebody else.
The guy from Inglourious Basterds.
I think so. Anyways, Hans Gruber was, I think, one of the first examples of the cool villain that I grew up with, because you have John McClane, who's schluppy, so you needed to have...
Super schluppy.
So you had to kind of have a yuppie to, contrast him with. And, Hans Gruber just had... He's played by Alan Rickman. What else do I have to say, man? That guy is cool. That guy is, stone cold. And his delivery, he's so fun. He's one of the great actors that we've lost in my lifetime. At too young of an age. I mean, he was up there, but he wasn't that far up there where he wasn't working anymore and had retired away. It's still a sad loss that we've had to deal with. Alan Rickman, man. But Hans Gruber, he was good enough to be competent, but also kind of slimy and sort of figuring it out as he went along. He was just as behind the 8 ball as John McClane was at many parts of the movie. And I think that's what made it so fun, because it really did have that tit for tat, cat and mouse kind of style game.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go with my fourth pick.
Yeah.
To a classic.
Uh-huh.
Rewind the clock back to 1980.
Ooh.
Jack Torrance. Shining.
That's almost that's a pretty equal, pretty spicy pick right there.
Oh yeah. Give us your best. Here's Johnny.
Here's Johnny.
That's not your best. That's your 15th best.
Here's Johnny.
I don't think you're giving it all.
Here's Johnny.
Oh my God. Give it to me at like a 12.
Oh my God. I don't know if I have a 12 in me. We're double podcast recording in. Let me get. Here's Johnny.
I feel like we didn't land the ship, but that's okay. Number 5, what do you got?
Okay. Number 5, I really want to get. I mean, you just chose such a great villain from the history of villainy with Jack Torrance. I mean, and I love the fact that Stanley Kubrick has, like, you know, main characters who are just villains in mundane ways. I'm just trying to think of the great. Well, you know what? I think you mentioned the movie earlier. Maybe you mentioned it back in the previous record that we did. But I'm going to go with a true tragic figure that I think could be called a villain by the end of his own film. Somebody who, you know, basically got everything he wanted in life and yet nothing he needed. A villain who, just through his own desires for control and manipulation, destroyed, you know, many other people's lives, livelihoods, and tried to make his perfect little world just so he could be safe within it and control everything. And that would be Howard Foster Kane, Citizen Kane himself.
Ooh.
Probably one of the first great megalomaniacal villains of cinema, one of the first great character studies of cinema. And, you know, if the stories are true, based on one of the true great villains of America, William Randolph Hearst.
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to be talking more about him in the future.
Yeah, I think so. Spoilers.
Spoilers. Secret.
Okay.
Super secret. Yeah. All right, my last pick, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going deep in the annals of history here to pull out the most devious, the most disturbing, and the most reprehensible of all supervillains or other villains or villainous characters. For my 5th and final pick, I am going to go with the Food Inspector.
Danny, who played the Food Inspector?
I don't know, Joel. Who played the Food Inspector?
We might never know, but I think if you go and watch the movie, he's probably credited, I hope. Danny, do we have a place where we can watch the Food Inspector?
I think so. Let me see if it's on YouTube.
Okay, because if so, it is in the show notes, and you should be going to watch that right now. In fact, we should make sure that Will makes that the video that he puts like right up here at the end to watch.
Oh wow, there's a lot of Food Inspector content, none of which is what you would think.
Oh,
but here it is, with 67 whole views.
that is tragically low. And one of my goals is for the Food Inspector to at least have 1,000 views,
or maybe 68.
It's more like 69. Am I right?
It's definitely online. It's definitely a bizarre film, and it definitely stars the one, the only, Joel A. Watts. Have a baguette.
It's actually probably my best performance in a movie, and I've been somebody who's been casted in a web series where I was professionally paid, and this was a student film for. Was it even for a film class, or was it just for some random, English assignment?
You're talking about The Flesh Life?
Well, no, I'm talking about the Food Inspector. What did you make the Food Inspector for school?
Yeah, I don't remember why I made it, but I made it. I think I
Isn't it tragic that your best films, not to say only not all your good films, you have amazing films, but some of your best films were made for like an English assignment or a Spanish assignment. Like, I don't know.
Oh yeah, I mean, I really milked a lot of those assignments to make short films.
Yeah, you were very creative, not only in making art, but finding reasons to make art. And it's almost like one of those things. Like we're getting back on the track, but it can be so hard to find good excuses to make art once you get out of school, because you don't have some assignment looming over you that makes you have to finish.
Yeah, you gotta make your own assignments.
Yeah. Well, speaking of assignments, I think we've assigned all 5 of our draft picks for this segment of the show, and I think that was a really solid, just a really fun something random. Not too stressful on me. In fact, I'd say I'll play again.
Yeah, I generally try to make sure that they're games you don't want to play a second time, and then I generally try to play it a second time. So I consider this to be a fail.
Yeah. All right, Danny. Well, with that, I think we should be getting out of here. Do you have anything to say to the audience while on our way out?
Yeah, hey, thanks for listening to us. We are very tired and very appreciative of your listens. And ring that bell, ring it.
And like and subscribe. And as always, you have been
Danny.
And I have been Joel, reminding you that you have to start somewhere, so why not here? Thanks for listening.
Where is here exactly?